It began with the hum of engines across the Lincolnshire countryside, the deep, rhythmic growl of Merlin engines preparing for flight. It was March 8, 1942, at RAF Waddington, one of Bomber Command's most active airfields, crews of Number 44, Rhodesia. Squadron gathered beneath the low-hanging clouds, their eyes fixed on the map room where red lines stretched deep into occupied Europe. Their destination, Essen, heart of the Ruhr, home to the Krupp armaments factory. Few knew it then, but this would become one of the most perilous nights in the squadron's history. The men were young, most in their early 20s. Pilot Officer John Jack Wainwright, just 21, had already completed 15 sorties. His crew trusted him implicitly, though all understood the odds. Fewer than half of Bomber Command's crews survived a full tour. They climbed into their Lancaster BI, call sign KMD, its bomb bay filled with 1,000-pounders and incendiaries meant to cripple Germany's industrial backbone. The mission brief was clear. Fly low across the North Sea, ascend over the Dutch coast, and strike Essen under the cover of darkness. But the weather was turning. By 22 hours, a freezing drizzle had turned to sleet. Despite the conditions, the order came through. Operation Go. One by one, the Lancasters rolled down the wet runway, lifting into the black void. The wireless operators made their last checks. Ground crews watched the faint glimmer of exhaust flames fade into the horizon, unaware it was the final time they would see some of those aircraft. At 01:20, German radar near the coast of Friesland picked up multiple contacts. Heavy flak erupted as the first bombers crossed into occupied territory. KMD, however, maintained radio silence. Standard procedure, though some crews reported hearing brief Morse bursts from an unknown source. Vectoring lost, cloud cover heavy, then silence. In the squadron's logbook, KMD's last recorded position was east of Texel. No distress call, no sighting, simply gone. Back at Waddington, the operations room tracked the returning bombers on the plotting board. Each one that radioed in lifted spirits momentarily until it became clear that 5 aircraft were overdue. At dawn, Wainwright's Lancaster remained unaccounted for. Presumed missing, read the report filed at 0600 hours. The telegrams followed, delivered quietly, with practiced sympathy, to families who would spend decades without answers. Post-war investigation teams combed through captured Luftwaffe records and Allied reconnaissance imagery. No mention of a crash in the Texel region. Some Dutch witnesses recalled hearing an aircraft overhead that night, flying unusually low, followed by a distant explosion far out to sea. Yet no wreckage was ever recovered. The North Sea had swallowed its evidence, as it had done countless times before. Bomber Command's losses during this phase of the war were staggering. 1 aircraft in 10 failed to return from an average mission. But the disappearance of Wainwright's crew was particularly haunting because it lacked closure. No signal, no trace. Even Luftwaffe night fighter logs listed no engagement in that grid reference. It was as if the aircraft had simply vanished into the mist. In later years, fragments of RAF navigation charts were discovered along the Dutch coastline. They bore serial numbers consistent with 44 squadron equipment, but the inked routes showed a curious deviation. KMD appeared to have turned north, away from its planned ingress route. Whether it was due to navigational error, evasion from night fighters, or an attempt to return home after damage, remains a mystery. In a letter written shortly before his final mission, Wainwright had told his sister, "Every night feels the same, noise, cold, fear, and yet we go again. I think about home less now. It's easier that way." His words, preserved in a small museum near Lincoln, are a haunting echo of the men who fought not only the enemy, but the night itself. Today, the North Sea still holds many of those secrets. The tides shift, sands move, and fragments of aluminum sometimes surface near the Dutch coast. Relics of bombers that never made it home. The story of KMD is one among hundreds, yet it captures the essence of Bomber Command's invisible war. Brave crews who took to the air knowing each flight could be their last, and whose fates would remain unmarked beneath the waves. 80 years later, underwater archaeology teams continue to survey the seabed using sonar and magnetometer scans. Occasionally, they find evidence: twisted metal, corroded engines, shattered propeller blades. But for some aircraft, like KMD, the sea remains silent. And with that silence endures the question, What truly happened in those final moments before contact was lost? As the war intensified, the skies grew deadlier, and Bomber Command's missions pushed deeper into enemy territory. Each disappearance added another name to the long list of missing in action. But what began with the mystery of one Lancaster would soon extend beyond to entire crews, entire flights, whose last transmissions would echo through history as chilling fragments of unfinished stories. In the bitter cold of December 1943, the Atlantic was at its most unforgiving. Beyond the rolling grey swells, war raged unseen. A vast, secret struggle between Allied patrols and German U-boats that hunted convoys bound for Britain. The men of RAF Coastal Command were the silent guardians of those routes, their mission as vital as it was perilous. Among them flew the crews of the short Sunderland flying boats, massive, 4-engine aircraft that could patrol for up to 14 hours, alone, across thousands of miles of open sea. One of these flights, designated Q for Queen, would vanish without a trace off the coast of Norway, leaving behind a mystery that would baffle investigators. For decades, it was December 27, 1943, Sunderland, DB1103 of number 210 Squadron prepared for an anti-submarine patrol out of RAF Sullom Voe in the Shetland Islands. The briefing was routine. Sweep the Norwegian coast near Stavanger, report any surfaced U-boats, and return by nightfall. Squadron leader Arthur Mac McIntyre, a respected veteran with 28 missions, led a crew of 10. Their aircraft was loaded with 4 depth charges, additional fuel tanks, and the standard 7.7mm defensive turrets. Weather forecasts predicted snow squalls, but nothing severe enough to abort. At 07:35 hours, DW1103 roared down the icy waterway, lifted cleanly into the grey dawn, and set a course east toward the Norwegian Sea. For the first hours, all seemed uneventful. Coastal Command's operations room received regular position reports. Grid 16A, visibility moderate. But by 1100 hours, a message crackled through static. Engaged enemy. Losing altitude, the signal was cut short. Attempts to re-establish contact failed. At first, operators assumed radio malfunction, not uncommon in those frigid conditions. But when the crew missed their 1200-hour check-in, urgency grew. By mid-afternoon, weather in the area had worsened. Heavy snow, freezing winds, and near-zero visibility. Yet other Sunderlands operating further south returned safely. DW1103 had simply vanished. For the next 3 days, a combined British and Norwegian resistance search effort was mounted. Coastal Command dispatched additional aircraft to scour the region, while local fishermen in neutral Sweden reported spotting oil slicks drifting westward. Nothing conclusive was found. No wreckage, no life rafts, not even floating debris. The North Sea had consumed them completely. The official RAF communiqué issued on January 3, 1944 was brief. Aircraft failed to return. All crew missing, presumed lost. 10 names were added to the memorial wall at Runnymede. To understand their loss, one must appreciate the hidden war that Coastal Command fought. The Battle of the Atlantic was not just a contest of firepower, but endurance. Crews battled freezing temperatures, fatigue, and mechanical failure as often as the enemy. The Sunderlands were nicknamed Flying Porcupines for their heavy armament, capable of defending themselves against attacking fighters. Yet they remained vulnerable to both weather and surprise assaults by Focke-Wulf 200 Condors, long-range German patrol bombers operating from occupied Norway. Several Condor engagements had been logged in the same patrol region that week, though none confirmed around the time of DW1103's disappearance. Post-war research added tantalizing fragments. A decoded German naval intercept from December 27th mentioned enemy aircraft engaged west of Egersund. No outcome was recorded, but Luftwaffe archives revealed that a Condor from Kampfgeschwader 40 failed to return that same day. Could it have been a mutual kill? Both aircraft downed over the freezing sea? The evidence ends there. Without wreckage, no one could know for sure. In 1986, Norwegian divers exploring wreck sites off Stavanger discovered fragments of aluminum alloy and a corroded machine gun casing stamped 303 British. Initial speculation pointed to a lost Sunderland, but metallurgical tests dated the debris to 1941, 2 years too early. The true resting place of DW1103 remains undiscovered. Yet the story of the lost Sunderland is not just one of disappearance. It is one of devotion and endurance. Squadron diaries reveal how crews often viewed the sea as both ally and enemy. It could conceal them from radar, or swallow them whole. In one entry written by a fellow pilot, Flight Lieutenant Roger Hall noted, "When the sea turns grey and the radio fades, you begin to understand loneliness. Not the kind you feel in silence, but the kind where the world forgets you exist." For Coastal Command, that feeling was constant. Today, the North Sea remains littered with remnants of that hidden war. Corroded hulls, rusted propellers, scattered bones of ships and planes alike. For families of the 10 men aboard WWII, the unanswered questions still linger. Did they fall in combat, or did ice and mechanical failure doom them? Could survivors have reached the Norwegian coast, only to be captured or lost in the wilderness? The official record offers no answers. Only a line in a ledger, missing, presumed dead. But every mystery leaves echoes. Occasionally, fishermen still report sonar anomalies off the Norwegian shelf. Large metallic shapes resting deep below. One day, perhaps, technology will confirm what history cannot. Until then, the story of DW1103 endures as a symbol of those countless wartime flights that ventured into the storm and never returned. As 1944 dawned, RAF night fighter squadrons faced a different kind of threat closer to home. Over England's southern skies, a new mystery unfolded, one that would challenge even the most experienced crews and defy explanation in the heat of the Blitz's final chapters. By early 1944, Britain's night skies were once again aflame. The Luftwaffe had launched Operation Steinbock, the so-called Baby Blitz, a desperate retaliation against the Allied bombings of German cities. Between January and May, waves of enemy bombers swept toward London, Southampton, and Bristol. But by now, the balance of power in the air had shifted. RAF night fighter squadrons, flying the sleek and deadly de Havilland Mosquito, hunted intruders with ruthless efficiency. Among them, 85 Squadron, based at RAF West Malling in Kent, had become one of the RAF's elite units. It was from here that one aircraft, a Mosquito NF Mach 3, call sign VYH, took off one February night and disappeared without a trace over the English Channel. Its fate remains one of the most perplexing mysteries of the campaign. The night of February 20th, 1944, began like many others. Clear skies over the Thames estuary, with London's blackout cloaking the landscape in darkness. Squadron leader Peter Rawlings and his navigator, flying officer Thomas "Tom" Barrett, were veterans, disciplined, confident, and accustomed to the razor's edge intensity of night interceptions. Their Mosquito, equipped with the latest AI Mach 8 radar, was one of the most advanced night fighters of the war. Shortly before midnight, they were scrambled to intercept incoming German bombers heading toward Bristol. Vector 200 Angels 15 came the order from ground control. It was a routine intercept, or so it seemed. The Mosquito climbed into the night, its twin Merlin engines roaring above the frozen Kent countryside. At 0:24, Barrett reported a radar contact near the coast, faint but steady. Target bearing 085, range 4 miles. Ground radar confirmed no other friendly aircraft in the area. The crew turned east, descending slightly to engage. What followed was a brief exchange of clipped transmissions, typical of experienced airmen. Contact closing. Visual acquired. Then, silence. Minutes later, ground control attempted to re-establish contact. No response. The aircraft's radar blip faded as it passed beyond range. At 0110, RAF Beachy Head radar logged a single unidentified signal flickering low over the channel, then vanishing completely. Searchlights scoured the coastline. Nothing. No crash reports, no explosions, no debris. At dawn, lifeboats were dispatched from New Haven and Dungeness to sweep the sea. But all they found were churning waves and bitter wind. VYH was never seen again. The official assumption was combat loss. Luftwaffe records from Nachtjagdgeschwader 2, NJG-2, based in northern France, indicated several sorties that night. Yet none claimed an engagement near the channel at the time of Rawlings' disappearance. Nor were any German bombers reported lost in that sector. It was as if both hunter and prey had vanished from the night sky. Post-war inquiries reopened the case several times. The Mosquito's last known vector placed it near a patch of channel airspace, notorious for radar interference, caused by overlapping ground signals and atmospheric anomalies. Some suggested instrument failure or disorientation, the so-called black hole effect, where pilots misjudge altitude in darkness and descend into the sea without realizing it. But Rawlings was no novice. He had logged over 400 flight hours and completed 29 night interceptions. His reputation among ground controllers was impeccable. He flew the dark like a hawk, one recalled. If anyone could come home in bad weather, it was him. Then came a curious discovery. In 1962, a fisherman dredging off Dieppe recovered a corroded aircraft part, a piece of landing gear marked de Havilland 97413. The serial match components used on the Mosquito NF Mk3. British authorities examined it, but the find's location puzzled them. It lay nearly 40 miles south of the Mosquito's presumed flight path. How had it ended up there? Drift patterns didn't account for such distance. The wreckage was quietly archived, and the case remained unresolved. Historians later revisited radio logs from that night and noticed something striking. Around 0040, roughly when Rawlings went silent, several RAF ground posts reported hearing faint Morse signals on a frequency slightly below standard operational channels. The content was garbled, but repeated phrases resembled friendly and returning base. None were attributed to known aircraft. Could Rawlings have tried to switch frequencies as his systems failed? Or was he hearing and responding to another aircraft in distress? The mystery deepened. For those who flew the Mosquito, such uncertainties were part of the job. Known as the Wooden Wonder, its lightweight balsa plywood frame allowed tremendous speed but offered little protection if something went wrong. A single mechanical fault could prove fatal, especially over water. Yet no trace of oil, fuel, or wreckage ever washed ashore, highly unusual given the proximity to land. In 1999, a team of aviation archaeologists from the Channel Islands initiated sonar mapping of suspected crash sites. One anomaly near Dieppe showed the outline of a twin-engine aircraft buried beneath layers of silt. Weather prevented further investigation, and funding ran out before recovery could begin. Some believe it may still rest there, undisturbed, the final resting place of Rawlings and Barrett. 80 years later, the mystery of WWII endures as one of the RAF's great unsolved wartime enigmas. It is a story that blurs the line between combat and circumstance, where the enemy may not have been the cause at all, but the darkness itself. For families who waited, the silence was harder than loss. Barrett's fiancée kept his last letter sealed for decades. In it, he wrote, "The nights are quieter now, but I've learned that silence can be louder than flak." As the war raged on, silence would become an all-too-familiar sound. And in the months leading to D-Day, the dangers multiplied, with new missions over occupied France where every shadow held a threat, and one wrong turn could mean disappearing forever. By June 1944, Europe stood on the edge of liberation. Operation Overlord, the Allied invasion of Normandy, was about to begin, and in the days leading up to D-Day, the Royal Air Force played a critical, unseen role. Before the soldiers could land, the bombers had to pave the way. But in that storm of preparation, one RAF crew vanished under circumstances that have never been fully explained. Their names would later appear on the Runnymede Memorial, their Lancaster never found, their mission lost to the fog of war. It was June 4th, 1944, 2 days before the invasion. The men of 97 Squadron, an elite Pathfinder unit based at RAF Coningsby, were finalizing their briefing for what seemed a routine target marking operation. The mission was designated Operation Coverlet, a code name for the softening strikes across the Cotentin Peninsula, meant to disrupt German communications and airfields before the landings. Pathfinder crews carried flares, radar beacons, and precision maps. They were the eyes of Bomber Command, marking targets so that the waves of heavy bombers behind them could strike accurately. Their motto, "We guide to strike." Among the crews that night was Flight Lieutenant Douglas Hale and his team, 6 men who had already flown over 40 sorties together. Their aircraft, Lancaster ND-739, was a veteran machine fitted with H2S radar and G navigation systems. At 23:58, they took off into a low, murky sky, one of 22 Lancasters tasked with lighting up enemy positions around Valognes, near Cherbourg. Radio transcripts show their last confirmed check-in at 0:43 over the English Channel. They crossed the Normandy coast soon after, and were never heard from again. The first indication that something was wrong came at 02:10. A nearby Pathfinder aircraft, piloted by Squadron Leader Harris, reported an unidentified signal pinging from Hale's assigned frequency. Faint, distorted and cutting off abruptly. At the time, ground controllers believed it was atmospheric interference. The operation concluded successfully, and most crews returned by dawn. ND-739, however, failed to report back. When daylight patrols surveyed the designated area, there was no sign of a crash, no flares, no debris. The aircraft had vanished completely. The next morning, RAF intelligence received an unusual intercept from a German radar post near St. Lo. It recorded a single, unidentified aircraft turning sharply inland, away from the expected route back to England. The signal was lost near Mortagne, over 80 kilometers south of the intended flight path. No German fighter squadrons were active in that area at the time. What compelled Hale to divert so far off course remains unknown. Months later, after the liberation of Normandy, Allied investigators combed the Cotentin countryside for wrecks. Dozens of crashed aircraft were found, American, British and German alike, their twisted frames buried in hedgerows and fields. But not ND-739. French villagers near Saint-Hilaire-du-Harcouët told investigators they'd seen a large four-engine plane flying low and erratically in the early morning of June 5th, pursued by searchlights but no fighters. One witness recalled, "It was on fire but silent, no engine noise, just burning light." No crash was ever found in the area. In 1951, the RAF Missing Research and Inquiry Service revisited the case. They discovered fragments of aluminum and an oxygen bottle near Montpenchon, far east of the original flight corridor. Serial numbers were too corroded for identification, but their location suggested the Lancaster may have broken apart in mid-air. Some speculated a direct flak hit. Others pointed to a navigation failure caused by jamming. The Germans had been experimenting with Knickerbein radar countermeasures, capable of confusing Allied beacons. If Hale's H-2S radar malfunctioned, he may have followed a false return signal inland, unaware he was flying deeper into occupied France. One surviving radio operator from another crew later wrote in his diary, "The Pathfinder boys had it hardest. No escort, first in, last out. They lit the sky for everyone else. And if something went wrong, no one saw it." That night, something had gone terribly wrong. For decades, the mystery of Lancaster ND-739 persisted. French researchers conducted surveys in the 1980s, interviewing locals who remembered the night before D-Day as one of chaos. Paratroopers dropping, flares illuminating the countryside, anti-aircraft guns blazing. In such confusion, it's entirely possible a stricken aircraft went unnoticed, its wreck buried beneath fields already scarred by invasion. Still, the absence of any definitive wreckage keeps the story shrouded in doubt. Flight Lieutenant Hale's personal logbook, preserved by his family, ends with the simple entry: Target, Cotentin Peninsula. Duty, marker lead. Crew, as before. It is a haunting fragment, an unfinished sentence in a war full of unfinished stories. Modern historians occasionally revisit the coordinates of that lost flight, overlaying wartime radar data with contemporary satellite imagery. A few anomalies, patterns of disturbed earth or metallic readings, have been noted in the rolling farmland south of Coutances. Excavations are planned but costly. For now, the ground remains untouched. What happened to the Pathfinder crew of ND-739? Shot down by unseen flak? Victims of navigational deception or drawn off course by technical failure? The truth lies buried, somewhere between the beaches they helped to save and the skies that swallowed them. Their loss was recorded as operational, cause unknown. Yet their mission, though incomplete, paved the way for one of history's greatest operations. And as the war pressed deeper into Europe, new missions, even more secret and dangerous, would push the limits of the RAF's endurance. One such flight, launched months later in the bitter winter of 1945, would disappear not over the sea, but over the shadowed mountains of Central Europe. By February 1945, Europe was collapsing under the weight of Allied advance. The Wehrmacht was in retreat, but chaos still reigned across occupied territories. As armies pressed in from all sides, the need for intelligence, coordination, and support behind enemy lines became critical. The RAF's Special Operations Executive, the SOE, had been running clandestine missions for years, supplying resistance fighters throughout Europe. Many of these operations were conducted by air, under cover of night, with bombers modified for stealthy drops. One such flight, a Halifax bomber from 138 Squadron, vanished during a supply mission over Czechoslovakia. Its disappearance remains one of the most intriguing and tragic of the war's final months. The night was February 11th, 1945. At RAF Tempsford in Bedfordshire, known as the most secret airfield in the world, crews assembled under strict radio silence. Their orders came from a locked briefing room marked Special Duties Only. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The crew of Halifax NP929, led by Flight Lieutenant James "Jimmy" Calloway, was to deliver weapons, medical supplies, and a Czech SOE agent codenamed Janek to a drop zone near the Ore Mountains. The mission was classified X-47, authorized by the SOE's Eastern European desk. Departure time, 19:30 hours. The Halifax, a Mike Vest variant, had its bomb bay converted to carry cylindrical canisters and an external parachute container. The rear turret had been modified to reduce drag and noise. As snow flurries swept across the airfield, Calloway's crew, 6 Britons and 1 Czech, loaded up. "One more trip, boys, and then home," someone remarked half-heartedly. They all knew there was no such thing as a routine SOE mission. At 1946, NP929 lifted from the runway and banked southeast. Their planned route crossed northern France, over Luxembourg, then deep into German-held territory. The aircraft flew at treetop level, using the terrain to mask itself from radar. The navigation officer, Flying Officer Howard Briggs, used Eureka Rebecca beacons, small radio transponders operated by resistance cells, to pinpoint the drop site. At 22:10, the crew sent a coded burst to Tempsford. On course, cloud cover light, proceeding as planned. It would be the last transmission ever received. By dawn, when the aircraft failed to return, radio operators logged it as missing. Within hours, search attempts were called futile. The region they had flown over was heavily defended, and the front lines were shifting rapidly. Any emergency landing behind enemy lines would have been suicidal. Still, the SOE held hope. Perhaps they'd made contact with the resistance and gone to ground. But weeks passed. No word came from Janek or his handlers. Post-war, Allied intelligence officers traced fragments of the flight's possible path. A German anti-aircraft unit near Most reported shooting down an unidentified 4-engine aircraft at approximately 22:45 that night, burning in descent heading east. Yet curiously, no crash was ever found in the recorded coordinates. In 1947, Czech villagers near the Ore Mountains recounted hearing engines sputtering, followed by a distant explosion that echoed like thunder in the hills. Despite searches, no wreckage was recovered. The mountains were treacherous, deep snow, hidden ravines, and minefields left by retreating Germans. Many suspected the aircraft went down in an inaccessible valley and was simply never found. Then, in 1968, a Czech forest worker discovered what appeared to be the rusted frame of an aircraft engine buried in moss near Klášterec nad Ohří. The serial number was partially legible, Bristol Hercules 100. That matched the engine type of a Halifax, but not the specific serial of NP929. The find reignited speculation, but provided no closure. The area was under Soviet control at the time, and access was quickly restricted. Reports disappeared into Cold War archives. What made NP929's mission especially mysterious was its supposed cargo. Decades later, declassified SOE records revealed that Operation X-47 was more than a supply drop. It was also a courier extraction. The aircraft was tasked with retrieving a high-value Czech resistance leader codenamed Bishop, who possessed detailed intelligence on German retreat routes and secret weapon sites. Some historians now believe the Halifax may have diverted to a secondary landing zone near Plzeň to complete this pickup. If so, it would have flown much deeper into enemy territory than originally planned, increasing its exposure to night fighters or flak. Theories abound. Some claim the aircraft was shot down by Soviet anti-aircraft fire after straying into their sector, mistaken for a German bomber. Others argue mechanical failure, ice buildup on wings, a common hazard in the region's mountain weather. A darker theory suggests that the SOE agent on board, Janek, was compromised and the mission ambushed from within. None of these have ever been proven. For the families of the crew, the lack of evidence has been its own torment. Calloway's fiancée, Margaret Evans, wrote in a 1946 letter, "They told us the war is won, but for some of us, it never ended. I can't stop hearing the engines in my dreams." Her letter, along with a photograph of the crew in front of their Halifax, is displayed at the Tempsford Memorial Chapel, a silent testament to those who flew in darkness for others' freedom. Today, amateur historians and local researchers continue to search the Czech highlands. Each summer, metal detectors sweep through forests where the crash might have occurred. In 2019, a small aluminum plate was unearthed, engraved NP9. Analysis is ongoing. Could this finally be proof of the missing Halifax? No one knows for certain, but the story of NP929 is a haunting reminder of the final desperate months of the war, when victory was near, but the skies were still claiming lives. As Europe prepared for peace, these men embarked on one last secret mission, flying into the heart of enemy territory, and into history's silence. Their loss marked one of the SOE's final airborne operations. And yet, as the guns of Europe fell silent, the world's attention turned back to the Atlantic, to the countless airmen who had vanished before them, and to the question that still lingered. Why did so many of the RAF's bravest simply never return? When the war in Europe finally ended in May 1945, Britain celebrated victory. But for thousands of families across the Commonwealth, peace brought no closure. Across the fields of France, the forests of Germany, and the vast expanse of the Atlantic, more than 8,000 Royal Air Force aircraft were still missing. Their crews, presumed lost, had no graves. Each name was carved into stone at the Runnymede Memorial, a quiet monument to those who had flown into the night and never come home. The stories of 5 such flights, from the icy North Sea to the mountains of Central Europe, reflect the unseen cost of victory and the enduring mystery of those who vanished between the clouds. The war's air campaigns were among the most perilous ever undertaken. Bomber Command alone lost over 55,000 men. In the freezing cockpits of Lancasters, Halifaxes, and Sunderlands, aircrews faced the twin dangers of the enemy and the elements. They flew by moonlight, guided by primitive instruments, over enemy territory bristling with guns and searchlights. Some disappeared in explosions witnessed for miles. Others faded without a trace, swallowed by sea, forest, or snow. For their families, the telegrams carried only a few devastating words: missing, presumed killed. But behind each of those words lay a story of courage, of duty, and of unanswered questions. Years later, fragments began to emerge. Fishermen off Texel dredged twisted metal that might have belonged to Wainwright's Lancaster, lost in 1942. Norwegian divers still search for the missing Sunderland that vanished in 1943, combing the seabed with sonar in hopes of finding even a single propeller blade. Amateur historians along the French coast scour archives for evidence of Rawlings' Mosquito, its final flight a phantom in RAF records. In Normandy, aerial surveys show disturbed soil near the old flight path of the Pathfinder crew, who never returned from the eve of D-Day. And in the forests of Bohemia, beneath layers of moss and snow, villagers still whisper about the night a burning plane flew silently over the mountains and vanished into darkness. Each of these stories, though distinct, shares a haunting pattern: a routine flight, a last transmission, broken, incomplete, a silence, then nothing. For every confirmed wreck, there are dozens that remain hidden beneath oceans and fields, lost to time and shifting landscapes. The post-war Missing Research and Inquiry Service spent years scouring Europe to locate downed aircraft, recovering thousands of remains. But for many, including the 5 crews in this chronicle, no wreck was ever found. Their missions remain open-ended, their flight paths unfinished. Archival evidence sometimes sheds new light. Recently declassified documents from the Air Historical Branch include reports of radar interference, falsified enemy logs, and conflicting eyewitness accounts. Could navigational deception, equipment malfunction, or even friendly fire explain some of these vanishings? Possibly. Yet for every theory, there are gaps too wide to bridge. Technology may one day reveal what wartime chaos concealed. But until then, these mysteries endure, fragments of an era when men vanished into the fog and left only echoes behind. Among the most poignant artifacts are the letters left behind. "If I don't come back," one airman wrote in 1944, "don't think of it as loss. Think that I'm somewhere above you, still flying." Such words capture the quiet fatalism that defined an entire generation of aviators. They understood that survival was often a matter of luck. A clear sky, an engine's reliability, a fraction of a second's decision. When a crew failed to return, others simply noted it, sighed, and prepared for the next mission. War left little time for mourning. Today, efforts to locate missing RAF aircraft have become part of a global collaboration between historians, archaeologists, and families. Modern sonar mapping, drone imaging, and DNA identification have begun solving some of these wartime mysteries. Each discovery, however small, a watch, a parachute buckle, a cereal plate, restores a name to history. Yet many remain unsolved. The North Sea, the Channel, and the forests of Europe still conceal their secrets. For those who study these disappearances, the question is no longer just how these aircraft were lost, but why they were forgotten. The urgency of post-war reconstruction pushed such tragedies to the margins of memory. Only in recent years has the full scale of the RAF's missing been acknowledged. Their service remembered not through statistics, but through human stories like these 5. In the end, the vanished flights of World War II are more than mysteries. They are reminders of how fragile life was at 20,000 feet, and how even in victory, loss can echo for generations. Each mission carried not only bombs or supplies, but the hopes of those who believed that their effort, their sacrifice, might bring the world one step closer to peace. 80 years later, the skies they flew are quiet. The airfields are gone, their runways reclaimed by grass, their control towers empty, but the memory of those who never returned remains aloft, carried in the stories, records, and whispers of history. Somewhere beneath the waves, in the forests, or beneath the soil of a French field, their aircraft still rest, waiting to be found, and so, the final words of this chronicle belong to them. The airmen of the Royal Air Force who vanished between takeoff and dawn. They flew into darkness, guided by duty, knowing the risks. They never came back, but through their stories, these 5 tragic flights that never returned, they continue to fly, forever suspended in the night skies of our remembrance.